What happened on Apollo 10 that NASA kept silent for 40 years? That question alone is enough to intrigue anyone who loves mysteries and historical facts. Here you'll uncover one of the most curious secrets of space exploration, a recording hidden for decades, with sounds that seemed like a conversation, but no one could really explain. Imagine being in space, thousands of kilometers from Earth, hearing something strange that no one can decode. What would you do? Tell someone or keep it forever? Well, the Apollo 10 astronauts chose silence, revealing a lesser-known side of history. The pressure, the fear, and the culture of silence inside NASA. Get ready to dive into a story full of mysteries, curiosities, and interesting facts that show how the unknown has always been very close to us, even when we think everything is under control. Apollo 10 was like a dress rehearsal before the big show. Everything was real. The spacecraft, the suits, the tests. The only thing missing was the actual landing. Astronauts Tom Stafford, John Young, and Eugene Cernan got very close to the moon, just over 15 kilometers from the surface, and then returned home. It might sound strange, but that flight was essential for the success of Apollo 11, which would land 2 months later. An interesting fact is that the lunar module, nicknamed Snoopy, went almost all the way as if it were going to land, but it wasn't allowed to touch the surface. It was like training for a parachute jump, without jumping. Here's a curious detail. The module didn't even have enough fuel to return if they had tried to land. In other words, NASA didn't want to take any chances. Now there's a mystery here. Why risk so much, get so close, and not land? Officially, it was just a test, but many believe there was more behind it. Curiosities like this still fuel conversations today about politics, internal pressure, and even egos within the space program. Some say it was NASA's way of showing power without giving away the whole game. A curious historical fact. Even without landing, Apollo 10 was the first mission to bring a lunar module into moon orbit and simulate the entire landing sequence. It was like the astronauts rehearsed the full choreography, but skipped the final step. What's most impressive is imagining the tension these 3 men felt up there. They were right on the edge between success and disaster. Everything had to work perfectly. Any mistake could have been fatal. And yet, they carried out the mission with precision. But in the silence of space, something strange happened. Something they didn't expect to hear. And that would remain hidden for a long time. A strange noise, almost like a conversation coming from nowhere, would be recorded in the next part of the mission. And this curious sound would spark one of the most fascinating mysteries in space exploration. The far side of the moon is a lonely place. When Apollo 10 entered that part of the orbit, the astronauts lost all contact with Earth. No radio, no help, just the silence of space. Or at least, it was supposed to be silent. That's when something curious happened. Astronauts Tom Stafford and Eugene Cernan started hearing a strange sound in their headsets. A high-pitched, repetitive noise, like electronic voices talking. And the weirdest part, the sound lasted for almost an hour. Imagine being stuck in a metal capsule, floating in the dark, with no one to hear you. And suddenly, something starts talking to you. An interesting fact that few people know is that the sound was so clear, it caught the astronauts' attention right away. They even tried to figure out what it could be. At the time, no one panicked. Stafford and Cernan talked about the sound between themselves but stayed calm. They even joked, saying, "Are you hearing this too?" The problem was, back then, talking about strange things in space wasn't taken lightly. Any unusual curiosity could be seen as a threat to your career. And a noise like that, with no clear explanation, sounded like something no one wanted to admit, especially during such an important mission. So, even though this curious moment was happening right in front of them, they chose not to report it to NASA while still in flight. That silence, believe it or not, became part of the mystery. What makes this even more mysterious is that no one knew about the sound for decades. The audio was recorded but locked away in NASA's files, far from public eyes. Only many years later did people find out about this strange conversation between the modules. And even today, some believe it wasn't just interference. This part of the mission turned into one of the greatest curiosities of the Apollo program, because it sparks people's imagination. After all, what could cause such a strange sound in deep space? Voices, static, something else. What they heard there, in the silence of the moon's far side, still raises questions with no easy answers. And little did they know that this secret would stay hidden for nearly 40 years. It's hard to imagine, but even astronauts, highly trained, smart, experienced, were afraid to talk about certain things. Stafford and Cernan heard a strange sound in space, something that felt like a conversation coming from nowhere, but they chose not to tell NASA during the mission. Why? Simple fear. Back then, reporting anything unusual could make someone look unstable, or even crazy, and that was risky for anyone who wanted to keep flying. An interesting fact is that astronauts in that era knew public image was everything. Showing confidence and control was essential. Any unusual curiosity could be seen as a weakness. This decision to stay silent reveals something deeper. There was a culture of fear behind space exploration. Yes, it was a time of amazing discoveries, but also a time of intense pressure. The astronauts knew they were constantly being watched by NASA, the government, and the media. So any mystery, any strange noise, any reaction that wasn't normal, was better kept quiet. And this didn't just happen with Apollo 10. There are reports from other Apollo missions where astronauts saw or heard strange things and chose not to say a word. A curious detail. Some only talked about these experiences years later, once they had retired, far away from NASA politics. This forced silence is one of the most curious parts of the space program. People imagine astronauts had full freedom to report everything, but that wasn't the case. Many knew that if they talked about something unexplainable, they could be pulled from future missions. This created tension inside the spacecrafts themselves. Imagine hearing a sound you've never heard before, knowing it's real, and still not being able to talk about it. It's a human mystery, not just a technical one. And it was this fear of speaking up, this concern about being misunderstood, that kept the Apollo 10 conversations secret for so long. What they didn't know was that, one day, that strange recording would come out of NASA's archives. For decades, no one outside of NASA knew that recording even existed. The audio of that strange conversation was locked away for nearly 40 years. Not even the astronauts talked about it in public. It was only in 2008 that the material was made public. When the recordings were released, the reaction was immediate. The sound was real, strange, and completely out of the ordinary. That's when the speculation began. Many people thought it might be a message from space, some kind of signal that didn't come from Earth. Others, more skeptical, believed it was just interference. But the truth is, no one had a clear answer. And that only made the mystery grow. An interesting fact: when the audio was revealed, even engineers who worked on the Apollo program were surprised. They didn't know it had happened either. This kind of thing is what makes space exploration so fascinating. There are curiosities hidden for years that suddenly come to light and make everyone wonder, what else happened that we don't know about? The release of the Apollo 10 recording became a famous case among space fans, theorists, and even scientists. Many began to study the sound, trying to understand its origin. It was a high-pitched electronic noise, similar to radio signals, but with a rhythm that sounded like conversations. Yes, it felt like two things were exchanging messages. That really caught people's attention. And even with technical explanations coming later, there are still those who believe this was one of the most curious moments in space history. What's most interesting is how this audio stayed hidden for so long. NASA had tons of tapes, recordings, and documents, and a lot of it was just stored without being reviewed. Only when they started digitizing the old archives did this conversation come to light. And that's when the public finally had access to what had once been a secret. It shows how historical facts can be overlooked for decades, until someone decides to take a closer look. And this particular story, with its strange sounds and long silence, became a symbol of how the unknown has always been part of space missions. But what was that sound after all? The answer came soon after, and it was just as unexpected as the mystery itself. After many theories and speculations, NASA finally explained what happened. According to technicians, the sound the astronauts heard during the Apollo 10 mission was just radio interference. The signals from the lunar module and the command module crossed in space and created a noise that sounded like a conversation. Simple as that. No aliens, no mysterious messages, just a technical issue between equipment. But even with this explanation, the case kept attracting attention. And there's a curious reason for that. Sometimes people's imagination goes further than reality. And when it comes to space, everything seems possible. This episode ended up becoming a symbol. It showed how humans are drawn to what they don't understand. An interesting fact is that even with the official explanation, many people still believe there was something more. And the truth is, in stories like this, what matters most isn't always what really happened, but what it stirs inside people. This conversation, that should never have leaked, turned into one of the biggest curiosities of the Apollo program. It reminds us that behind every technical and calculated mission, there's always a piece of mystery. And it's that mystery that has driven human curiosity forever. In the end, that interference served as a reminder that not everything has to be extraordinary to be fascinating. Even a simple radio noise in the right place at the right time can become one of the most remembered moments of the space race. It's as if the universe is always ready to provoke us, even when everything seems under control. Apollo 10 wasn't the mission that took man to the moon, but it left a curious legacy. The sound no one really understood, the conversation that should never have happened, and the mystery that, in a way, still lives on. And that's where the magic lies. In what we can't fully explain. Have you ever imagined that something as strange as a mysterious conversation in space could be kept secret for almost 40 years? What do you think was the real reason for such a long silence? Could there be something beyond radio interference? Tell us in the comments what you believe. Curious to learn more about space mysteries and historical facts NASA never told? Then don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new video. After all, curiosity is what drives us forward, and together we'll explore the unknown. So, are you ready for the next mystery?